Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited you're here today because we're tackling one of the absolute most fascinating topics in human psychology. We're diving headfirst into the classic nature versus nurture debate. And for this session, we're really going to zoom in on the nurture side of things. We're going to explore how the environment around us might literally be coding our entire understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl.
Think about it for a second. Are boys naturally boisterous, or are they actually trained to be? It's a really provocative question, right? When we see a little boy wrestling and playing aggressively, or a little girl carefully feeding a doll, are we looking at innate biology, or are we looking at the results of a highly effective, totally invisible training program? Well, that is the core mystery of gender development we are going to unravel today.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the nurture code, direct reinforcement and its evidence, vicarious learning and role models, cultural shifts and stereotypes, and finally, the developmental blind spot. Let's get right into it.
First up, the nurture code.
So, social learning theory, or SLT for short, applied to gender suggests something pretty incredible. It basically says that gender is completely learned within a social context. Imagine a child's mind is just a totally blank slate. According to SLT, it's the environment doing all the drawing. We're talking parents, peers, teachers, culture, the media. They're the ones gradually sketching out exactly what gender means to that specific child over time.
Moving right along to Section 2, direct reinforcement and evidence. Think of direct reinforcement kind of like a brightly wrapped gift. SLT argues that kids are essentially rewarded or reinforced when they show gender-stereotyped behavior, and they're punished when they step outside those lines. So, for example, a little boy might get praised, given that metaphorical gift, right, for being active or playing tough. But he might get scolded or told to man up if he's being passive or gentle. It's this differential reinforcement that primarily teaches boys and girls to act differently.
And you know, this whole idea is captured perfectly in a classic study by Smith and Lloyd from 1978. Get this, they took babies just 4 to 6 months old and dressed them up. Half the time in boys' clothes, half the time in girls' clothes. And here's the wild part. Regardless of the baby's actual biological sex, adults treated them entirely based on how they were dressed. Babies they assumed were boys, they handed them a hammer-shaped rattle, bounced them around, encouraged them to be adventurous. But babies they thought were girls, they were gently handed a doll, praised for being pretty, and encouraged to just be passive.
So if we evaluate this evidence using the point, evidence, explanation, and link framework, the takeaway is super clear. The point? We have very strong supporting evidence for differential reinforcement. The evidence is that Smith and Lloyd observation we just talked about. The explanation? It shows us that gender-stereotyped behavior is being encouraged by adults literally from the time we are infants. And the link? Well, it directly supports the SLT explanation of how gender development kicks off.
But hold on a second, we really need to look at both sides here. A major counterpoint to all this is that, well, maybe differential reinforcement isn't the root cause at all. It is entirely possible that adults are just responding to innate biological differences that are already there in the kids. Like maybe boys just naturally are a bit more boisterous, and parents are simply reacting to that reality. If that's true, then social learning is probably just one piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle.
All right, part 3, vicarious learning and role models.
Now, kids don't only learn when they're the ones directly being rewarded or punished. They also learn vicariously. Picture a kid sitting in a movie theater, watching a projector. They observe the consequences of someone else's behavior and then secretly decide, hey, should I copy that? For instance, if a young girl sees her mom getting a ton of compliments for wearing a beautiful dress, she experiences vicarious reinforcement. She's thinking, I want that positive attention too, and is way more likely to model that feminine behavior. On the flip side, if a boy sees another boy getting teased on the playground for acting feminine, he gets a dose of vicarious punishment, and he learns pretty quickly to avoid doing that.
But it's not like kids just copy literally everyone they see. They're picky. They look for specific role models they can identify with. Usually, this means people in their immediate environment, like parents or teachers, or flashy figures in the media, like pop stars or athletes. Crucially, though, a child is way more likely to identify with someone who is attractive, has high social status, and, this is key, is the exact same gender as they are. They look at these specific people and think, yep, I want to be exactly like them.
So, how exactly does watching someone turn into actually doing what they do? Social learning theory breaks this down into 4 specific cognitive steps, which they call mediational processes. First up is attention.
A young boy has to actually focus and watch his favorite football player. Second is retention. He has to remember the specific moves he just saw. Third, motivation. He needs that real burning desire to be like his hero. And fourth is motor reproduction. He has to be physically capable of grabbing a ball, going outside, and actually copying the kick. You literally need all four of these things to align for modeling to happen.
Moving on to Section 4, Cultural Shifts and Stereotypes. Now this is where things get really fascinating, because cultural shifts actually give SLT a massive boost. Just think about the 1950s compared to today. Back then, there were these incredibly rigid, clear-cut rules about what was masculine and what was feminine. Today, gender norms are way more fluid, and stepping outside those boxes doesn't usually result in the same harsh social punishments. Here's the thing. Human biology hasn't fundamentally changed since the 1950s, but our social expectations, they absolutely have. Social learning theory explains this massive cultural shift perfectly in a way that pure biology just can't.
To add a really interesting layer of nuance to this, researchers Olson and Martini did a study in 2018 looking at counter-stereotypes. They found that girls absolutely are positively influenced when they see counter-stereotypical models, like women rocking it in STEM fields. But there's a catch. Kids don't automatically copy these counter-stereotypes if the behavior feels, too different from what they're used to. Plus, just a brief exposure isn't enough. For genuine, lasting attitude change, you need long-term, persistent contact with those role models.
And finally, Section 5, the developmental blind spot.
Okay, so as compelling as SLT is, there is a pretty glaring logical flaw here, which we call the developmental blind spot. SLT basically implies that modeling gendered behavior happens the exact same way at literally any age. It makes this huge assumption that a 2-year-old watches, processes, and copies information in the exact same way a 9-year-old does.
And the crucial point here is, well, that's just illogical, right? A toddler's brain is vastly different from a preteen's brain. This lack of developmental nuance puts SLT in direct conflict with prominent cognitive developmental theories, like Kohlberg's. Kohlberg argues that a child's understanding of gender fundamentally shifts and matures as their brain physically develops with age. So while SLT is great at explaining how behaviors are learned, it's really missing the mark on when and why it changes over time.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound thought to consider. If gender is truly nothing more than a socially learned script, why do 2-year-olds and 9-year-olds read that exact same script so differently? It really makes you wonder, maybe the environment provides the nurture code, but the developing mind is the one deciding how to actually run it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.